Welcome back to Thanks I'll Take It From Here, the podcast where we explore the stories that stay with us long after we close the book, leave the theater, or turn off the TV. I'm Cami, and today I'm thrilled to be joined by best-selling author Alyson Richman. Her newest novel, The Missing Pages, is out now. It is a haunting blend of history, romance, and the supernatural, inspired by the Titanic tragedy. It tells the story of Harry Widener, a passionate book collector who was lost at sea, and the ghostly secrets that resurface later in the library built in his honor.
So let's get into it.
Alyson, welcome to the show. I'm really excited to have you here. Before we dive in, I kind of want to start with something a little personal. So, the detail about Harry's decision in the middle of all of that chaos of the Titanic was to risk everything for a book he loved. It really made me think, what would I risk everything for? And on the light side, I could probably say my favorite pastrami sandwich from a deli that closed when I was a kid, but honestly, it would probably be this heart-shaped rock that I found on a beach while I was living abroad. I was really homesick when I found it, and I was struggling with the language, and my host family took me to the beach to kind of cheer me up, and that rock has traveled with me ever since. Every move, every heartbreak, it's always been with me, and it kind of reminds me that connection can be found anywhere. So I'm curious, if you were in Harry's place, what object, big or small, would you risk everything to go back for?
That's a great question. So I have a photo album that my grandmother created when she was 22 years old, and it has all of her old photographs of her going back to her great grandparents, and then including early photographs of her and my grandfather when they were courting. And I just love that book so much because I feel like it's this archival tome of my family history, and seeing my grandmother 22 years old, so beautiful, so full of life, seeing my grandfather young like that, my ancestors in that book, it's such a precious object to me. And I'm a mother as well, so part of me is like, oh, I would want my children's photographs too, but I feel like those are pressed in my mind's eye from having witnessed their childhood. So if I could only have one thing, I think it would be this book, because I wasn't alive to push those memories into my head, living side by side my grandmother during that period in her life.
I think that's really a great answer. That's something that's hard to replace, and especially since you said you were young and couldn't forge those memories yourself. And one of the things that I really admire about your work is just that history connection and how deeply rooted it is in research. So I'm really curious, what went into learning about Harry and his family in the library at Harvard?
So this book was really important to do the research before I began writing, to really truly understand who was Harry Elkins Widener. I mean, what we know factually about him is that he was a 27-year-old book collector, a Harvard graduate, a deeply sensitive man, and the son of a very, very wealthy Gilded Age family. So for me to be able to recreate his voice, because I do write in the first person of his ghost living in the library that his mother built in his honor after he perished on the Titanic, I needed to feel very, very closely connected to him. So it was about researching his childhood, who his parents were, what was his relationship with his grandfather, who was the one who made all this money, basically selling mutton to the Union Army during the Civil War. He was a self-made man. They became one of the wealthiest families in the United States, and why they started collecting things to begin with. Where did his love of book collecting come from? And then, of course, there is this legend surrounding him that he did not get on the lifeboat with his mother, but he, as you mentioned before, went back to get a precious book. So what book could have been so valuable that he risked his life to save it? And so that research took me to London, to the bookseller who sold him this particular book before he boarded the Titanic, to have an understanding, reading those archival letters between him and the bookseller, of why he wanted to purchase this 16th century copy of Francis Bacon's essays that was so small, it was the size of a baseball card. And supposedly he said to the bookseller that he was going to put it on his, in his breast pocket, so it would never be off his person, because in case he was shipwrecked, he'd have something to read. So that also brings this sort of ominous foreshadowing to his life story, that even the thought of something happening to the boat that he would be traveling home on.
It's really impressive to see the lengths you went to research about Harry and his story. So, I'm a bit of a history buff myself. Most of my house is decorated with things I found at thrift stores and estate sales and salvage depots. And I love that every object kind of carries a story. And sometimes I like to imagine that the previous owner, whether they're alive or maybe just ghosts, are happy that someone is appreciating what they left behind. So I'm curious, when you were researching, did you find yourself more drawn to the factual records? Are those smaller kind of human details that bring history to life? And were there any discoveries about Harry that surprised you?
Good question. So, I think what surprised me along the way was learning that the bookseller Quaritch Limited that he purchased this very rare book from before boarding the Titanic, that the owner's sister and the actual creator of this book store, the original Bernard Quaritch, his daughter, that they worked in the store, that there were female antiquarian booksellers. And that opened up this idea of who could be a possible love interest for Harry. Someone that was grounded in historical fact. How a woman like that at that time could have been educated, how she could have learned the antiquarian book trade, what options were available to her, and then to create this bond between her and Harry that was credible to the reader. So I guess that was the first sort of epiphany along the way, that I hadn't been anticipating the emerging of a female books, seller during that time period.
It's interesting that you bring that up because I was also thinking about the character Violet. I was curious what made you want to pair her story and her journey with Harry.
I wanted to have two parallel stories in the missing pages because I wanted to show how the library over time is a place of healing. It's originally created by Harry's mother, Eleanor Widener, after she does lose Harry on the Titanic. She's entrusted with his book collection, and so she decides to create this incredible library at Harvard with a reconstruction of his office inside the library with his original desk and chairs, beautiful oak shelves for his 3,000 volume book collection. And in her behest, by creating this library for her son, she stipulated that every week fresh flowers be put on his desk, his original desk that's in this memorial room, by the librarian at Harvard, to conjure up the sensation that at any moment he might pull down one of the books from his bookshelves, sit down and read. And so it becomes this sort of spiritual place as well, this room. It's a place of healing for a mother who's lost her son, a way of creating a lasting legacy in which his book collecting lives on. There's a relationship between future students in that book collection, and it's a healing space for his mother as well, to know that his name will not be forgotten. So the parallel story with Violet, I wanted to show how in real time, in modern day time, the library has a healing power over a student. And Violet is a page, in the library. That was actually suggested to me by one of the librarians who presently works at the Widener Libraries, thinking that it was a very good job to have for a character in my book, since pages are entrusted with rare books within the Widener collection to shuttle back and forth for scholars. And so she would be able to have access to the room and to other rare books. And I wanted the reader to see how there was a parallel in healing between Harry's family and also Violet. So Violet in the novel has suffered the loss of her boyfriend, also through drowning. So there is a parallel with the loss through water. There is grief there, and how the library begins to actually help her move through the waves of grief. And as she starts to feel that Harry's perhaps might be communicating to her from the other side, it leads her onto this journey, not only of the discovery of what the missing pages are of Harry's untold story and what happened in those last moments on the Titanic and what happened with that book that he had with him, but also it helps fill in the stories of her own story and certain things in her own past that she wasn't aware of. So both of them have a story that is rooted in grief but works towards the light of healing.
I'm curious, since this episode is going to be dropping right around Halloween and you
Yes.
wrote a book from the perspective of a ghost, do you believe in ghosts?
So I actually do believe in spirits. I believe that there are spirits on the other side, and there are people who have thinner veils between the afterlife and the present life that we're living in. I feel that if you're sensitive to that energy and signs, that people are trying to communicate from the other side. This might sound wacky to some of your listeners, but I truly believe that energy doesn't suddenly evaporate.
I definitely agree with that too. As I said, I'm a bit of a collector of things around my house, and I do believe that, taking care of some of these objects is honoring the people who had them. So I completely agree with you, and I don't think that's wacky at all. So I kind of want to talk a little bit about The Lost Wife. I hear that it's in development as a major motion picture. I was curious, what was it like to begin the process of watching your characters come to life in a new medium? Does that process make you see these characters different? Does it make you revisit the story in a different way? What is that like, that just going from one medium to the other?
Gosh, it's like it's such a great honor and also a beautiful thing to witness how another creative person, another artist, working in a different medium, sees your characters and basically brings them to life in another way. So, although The Lost Wife hasn't gone into production yet, it being in development, there is a script written by a screenwriter, there is a director attached. And I think seeing how the creative lens sees details and brings them to life, little tiny things that I wrote into the book, how they can expand on them and create even broader themes and different things like that. It's a beautiful thing to witness the creative process of something that you conceived of out of your own mind. It's a little thing that became bigger, and then to see how it continues on and organically develops into something different and also still very poignant and powerful.
With watching these characters move to different mediums, I'm very curious, as both a painter and a novelist, how does your background influence the imagery in your writing?
So I'm a self-taught writer. I did not have an MFA. I didn't go to school for writing in any way. And so every day that I sit down to write my novels, each chapter to me is like a blank canvas, and I don't do a outline for any of my novels. I really believe in building out the story sentence by sentence in the same way that a painter would build a canvas out brushstroke after brushstroke, and to have great respect for positive and negative space, looking at things from different perspective, having light and shadow, things that you apply to painting. I write intuitively that way. My mother was also a painter, and she taught me always to look at sculpture from different perspectives, to walk around the sculpture, never to look at it just, straight on. Or if you're looking at a painting, to look up close and observe the brushstroke and then take a few steps away and see how it changes. So that sense of spherical way of looking at things and looking at detail, that you can feel every texture, you can smell the smells, so you can feel that you're walking through the landscape or hearing the sounds of the steam being expelled from the chimneys of the Titanic, or smell the brine coming off the sea. Those type of things I feel I bring a sort of painterly touch to when I'm writing.
My husband, he's a artist, and he's also writing his first novel, and I could see the way his process is very similar to how you described it, whereas my process is completely different because I don't have that kind of artist background. I cannot paint, draw for the life of me. But I have a really fun activity that I want us to get into to kind of wrap up this episode. So part of what makes this podcast special is the name Thinks I'll Take It From Here. It was kind of born out of my appreciation for creators like yourself and my love for staying in these worlds and with these characters just a little bit longer. So I want to explore Harry a bit more, and I thought we would try something fun. I was curious, if Harry were alive today and he was a book talker, right? And he was recommending books that he enjoyed, what kind of books do you think he would promote? Like, would he highlight, maybe some forgotten classics or modern stories about memory and loss and rediscovery that connects to his own journey? What do you think Harry's book talk would look like today?
Such a good question, Cami. Oh my God. One of the things I learned when researching Harry Widener is that he loved adventure books. Treasure Island was a really important book for him, so he also loved long epic books. He loved Dickens. I think he would love a really great male epic. Unfortunately, I don't read big male epics, so I don't know if our reading would overlap in that way. But I also think he'd probably like Mitch Albom's new book Twice that just came out because there's a soulful quality to that book. And I think that sensitivity to that novel he would probably like. So yeah, that's what I'm gonna go with.
I think that's really interesting, the adventure aspect, and I think that definitely makes sense for the time period. I want to thank you so much for joining me today. Did you have any last kind of thoughts or opinions you wanted to share before we close?
No, just thank you so much for having me, and it's been a pleasure. And I really appreciate all your creative and thought-provoking questions, Cami.
Yeah, this has been really just such a thoughtful and inspiring conversation. And I really loved hearing about the history and just heart behind the missing pages. Can you tell listeners where they can find the book and maybe highlight a few of your upcoming tour stops?
Absolutely. So you can find the book hopefully at all your independent booksellers, also, the main chains like Barnes and Noble and McNally Jackson. And you can find me on AlysonRichman.com or on my Instagram handle, Alyson Richman. I'm going to be on tour a lot of places. I'm going to be in Boston on October 24th at 7 p.m. And then I'm going to be in Miami and Boca and all sorts of places. I'm going to be at the Toronto Book Festival. So I'm going to be doing some Canadian book stops. So definitely follow me on Instagram for all my venues, and hopefully I'll see you there.
Thank you so much. I know my Canadian subscribers are going to be so happy because 30% of my subscribers are Canadian. You guys can definitely go check
Wonderful.
out Allison when she comes to visit. And everything that she mentioned, I will also put in the show notes, including her socials, her tour info, and where you can purchase the book. Highly recommend supporting your independent bookstores. This has been truly a wonderful episode of Things I'll Take It From Here. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, share it with a friend who loves stories that stay with you long after the last page. Thank you so much again, Allison, and thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next time. Bye.